Well, the action plan to protect missing and murdered women and girls has been unveiled while the country is still coming to grips with the discovery of the remains of 215 children at the site of a former Indian residential school in Kamloops, British Columbia. It is a time of reckoning in this country, and my next two guests have some thoughts on how the reconciliation process should move forward from this moment. Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond is the director of the Residential School History and Dialogue Centre and a law professor at the University of British Columbia. She was also the first Treaty Indian to be named a judge in Saskatchewan. And Brad Regehr is the president of the Canadian Bar Association, the first Indigenous person to hold that position. He is the grandson of a residential school survivor. Thank you so much, both of you, for your time tonight. And it's a pleasure to have you on the program. And Mr. Turpel-Lafond, if I can, I wanted to start by getting your early assessment of this action plan on murdered and missing Indigenous women released today. What do you think?
It's a bit difficult to get a complete read on it because, of course, as we saw, the Native Women's Association of Canada walked away from the process, saying they didn't think it was adequate. It does look at making a substantial investment, but I am not sure whether or not it will respond on the ground to the very concrete issues that have been identified in terms of the safety of Indigenous women and girls. And of course, it will be important to hear the voices of those who have lost daughters and sisters, mothers and aunties, and grandmothers, to hear their views. It's a long time coming. And again, it's another step in a process that has been very slow in terms of addressing some of these fundamental human rights violations that Indigenous people have experienced.
Mr. Regehr, the action plan on murdered missing women and girls is viewed as we just heard from Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond, as another step on the path to reconciliation, but it doesn't offer any immediate change. Is it a meaningful plan in your view and what you've been able to get from it so far?
Well, I haven't had a lot of opportunity to analyze the report itself. It only came out a very short time ago today. I do certainly have a concern that a major player has walked away from the plan and has problems with it. So that those issues need to be rectified. Again, it's a long time coming. It's over 2 years since the final report was tabled. Certainly as an association, we'll be looking carefully at the recommendations, and particularly those that deal with justice issues.
Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond, the action plan today has once again put the focus on the treatment of Indigenous women and girls, and it comes as Canadians are still trying to come to terms with the discovery of the remains of those 215 children at the former residential school in Kamloops. So Canadians can't escape the raw evidence of how Indigenous people have been treated by this country. What's the significance of this moment, in your view, on the path to reconciliation?
I think the significance of the moment is it's increasingly hard for Canada and Canadians to take the approach of denying and minimizing what happened at the schools. It's a time to actually recognize that what the survivors told many, many courts where they had to bring their cases and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is evidence of a significant crime that happened in terms of the loss of the lives of children who are missing and we don't know where they are. And I hope it's a moment where we can say we will stop denying, minimizing, and downplaying the impact of not just residential schools, but the legacy of Canada's state colonialism that enabled and enacted for children to be rounded up and forced to attend schools, and all of the harms that they experience that they've courageously said, and Canada has attacked and denied it for years. And of course, survivors and groups trying to advocate for justice still are in the courts. Like the bands are still in the courts to get compensation for the cultural language and other loss from the schools. So it's been a long journey, and to have to uncover this, to Kamloops to have to do this on their own as a project without having Canada's to be accountable at the international level for what appears very clearly and was known to be a humanitarian crime, a potential crime. It doesn't look well on Canada, but it has to be a turning point. The denial, disrespect, and mistreatment of survivors, including intergenerational survivors, has to end.
Mr. Regehr, how should the discovery of those remains affect the process of reconciliation, and who should be held to account, and how should they be held to account?
Well, certainly the federal government needs to be held to account, and frankly, the churches have to be held to account too. They actively participated in this, and it was their employees who engaged in these I'll say for now, potential crimes. It's a wake-up call. It's a reckoning. It's showing Canadians that, these are more than just words in a final report somewhere. This actually happened, and we've got the evidence of it. There was a request made to Canada during the TRC process to fund searching out all of these missing children, to find the missing cemeteries, and it was rejected. And I just find it astounding that it's the expectation that Indigenous peoples and First Nations and Métis groups and Inuit groups are the ones who are going to have to undertake this work and pay for it to get it done. Frankly, it's appalling to me.
Let me move on. The MPs in the House of Commons, in the wake of the Kamloops discovery, Mary Ellen, have agreed to fast-track two government bills, C8, which changes Canada's oath of citizenship to acknowledge treaty rights, and C5, to establish a National Day of Reconciliation. And you touched on it, I think. At the same time, the federal government's in court appealing legal rulings in favor of First Nations on several fronts. How does that undermine the promise of reconciliation?
Well, I think it's the totality of what Canada does. And when we see different steps that parliamentarians are engaged in through these bills, and they are important, they almost always came from Indigenous members of Parliament or Indigenous concepts that came forward through the Senate, through leadership. So these bills are important, as is Bill C-15, to implement the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. But Canada has another face that Canadians are seeing more, which is one that has a desire to hide and fight. And sometimes with things like documents, make agreements with churches so that they're able to conceal and to limit and to put constraints on the truth and to not fully embrace what they should do, which is a very high level of accountability. And as President Regehr indicated, Canada needs to be held to account because these were state actions. And we're very suspicious about the capacity of Canada to hold itself to account because it's consistently not done that, and trust has been very broken. So on the residential school burial sites, it will be very important that Canada does invite the United Nations. The United Nations has flagged that Canada must follow proper procedure. We should be inviting them in. The parliamentarians are going to need to urge the Prime Minister to invite them in, and for us to deal with the burial site in particular in a way that complies with our international obligations, and finally stop hiding. Mr.
Regehr, in the 30 seconds or so we have left, there's a national public saddened, shocked, shamed by the revelations of the past week, looking for how to play their part in change. How do they do it?
I think they can reach out to their government leaders, their MPs, their MLAs if they need to, and tell them, you need to get this done. The calls to action need to be implemented. They need to be fully implemented. And on this particular issue, Canada needs to step up, and we've got to bring these kids home.
All right. Thank you both for your thoughts and perspectives this evening.